A man admires himself in a storefront window, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. But the glass reflects something else entirely. A woman's knowing smile, watching from the shadows behind him. Marcus had always prided himself on being a self-made man. Every morning, he'd stand before his bathroom mirror rehearsing the day's performance, the confident handshake, the measured laugh, the way he'd lean back in his chair during meetings, fingers steepled, projecting authority he'd learned from watching his father intimidate his mother at dinner tables 20 years ago. But today, something shifted in the familiar ritual. The mirror began to ripple like black water, and Marcus found himself stepping through its surface into a vast marketplace of reflective surfaces. Thousands of mirrors lined endless corridors, tall ones that stretched his frame into authority, curved ones that softened his edges into approachability, cracked ones that fragmented him into mystery. Each mirror bore a small placard with a woman's name: Sarah's protector, Mom's good son, Jessica's provider, the boss's rival. He moved through this labyrinth, watching himself morph and shift. In Sarah's mirror, his shoulders broadened and his jaw set into protective determination, the very stance he'd unconsciously adopted when she'd mentioned her ex-boyfriend's text. In his mother's mirror, his features softened into the dutiful child who still called every Sunday, his voice automatically dropping into the tone that meant responsible son. Each reflection felt authentic, yet none felt like him. At the maze's center stood an elderly woman polishing mirrors with methodical precision. Her eyes held the weight of centuries. "Admiring the collection?" she asked without looking up. "Each mirror shows you exactly what she needs to see. Quite the performance, isn't it?" Marcus stared at his fractured selves. "But which one is real?" She smiled, an expression both cruel and kind. "The one watching believes they're all real. That's the beautiful trap." She gestured to a final mirror, its surface completely black. "This one shows what you'd look like if no woman was watching. Care to try?" Marcus approached the dark glass, but his reflection never appeared. The mirror remained empty, offering only the sound of his own breathing in the silence. The ancients called it a curse. Today, psychology names it the persona, the mask we wear so convincingly that we forget we're performing. Coined by Carl Jung, the persona represents the false self we construct to meet external expectations. In modern life, it manifests in the LinkedIn profile that bears little resemblance to our internal struggles. The dating app version of ourselves that highlights only our curated adventures. The workplace personality that mirrors what we believe others want to see. We become method actors who've forgotten the role was temporary. Schopenhauer understood this theater intimately. He would call it a subtle manifestation of the will, that blind, driving force that compels us not just to survive, but to be desired, accepted, loved. The will doesn't care about authenticity. It cares about reproduction, social bonding, survival. So it crafts masks tailored to each audience, especially the women whose approval we unconsciously seek. We become walking algorithms, calculating which version of ourselves will generate the desired response. In myth, it was shape-shifting. In you, it's the exhaustion of never knowing which face to wear when you're alone. The marketplace of mirrors dissolves, leaving Marcus standing again before his bathroom reflection. But now he notices something he'd never seen before, the slight delay between his movement and the mirror's response, as if even his reflection needs a moment to decide which version of him to show. What does your collection look like? How many mirrors do you polish each morning, and which woman's name is written beneath the one you can't bear to break. The mirror knows what you've forgotten. The audience is always watching, even when the theater is empty. A woman draws blueprints at her kitchen table while her husband sleeps upstairs. The plans show their house, but with one strange addition: every room contains a smaller version of itself, nested infinitely inward like Russian dolls. Elena had always been the practical one. While David dreamed of traveling the world, she calculated mortgage payments. While he spoke of quitting his corporate job to write novels, she researched health insurance plans. She called it being responsible. He called it being supportive. Neither of them called it what it really was. Tonight, as David slept fitfully after another argument about living a little, Elena found herself sketching in the margins of their monthly budget. But her pen began drawing something unexpected: architectural plans for rooms that didn't exist, doors that opened onto smaller doors, windows that looked into tinier windows, staircases that led to miniature versions of the same staircases. The kitchen around her began to shift and expand. The walls stretched upward into cathedral heights, and Elena realized she was now standing in a vast construction site. Women in hard hats moved with purpose through the scaffolding, each carrying blueprints identical to hers. They were building something magnificent and terrible, a prison so beautiful, so comfortable, that its inmates would never want to leave. "First time on the project?" asked a woman whose tool belt clinked with tiny golden keys. Her name tag read Margaret Foreman. She gestured toward the construction. "We're building the future for them. Climate-controlled comfort, predictable routines, safe investments, sensible shoes. No sharp edges, no unplanned detours, no uncomfortable surprises." Elena watched as the women installed padding around every corner, lowered every ceiling to prevent dreams from growing too tall, and filled every window with frosted glass to obscure distant horizons. But what if they want to leave? Margaret smiled with maternal warmth. "Oh, honey, they won't. We make sure of that. We build the cage so perfectly that they'll think it was their own idea. They'll thank us for the comfort, never realizing we've traded their wings for our peace of mind." A discarded mask from another construction site lay at Elena's feet, a face frozen in confident authority. She picked it up, feeling its weight. "But what about us? Who builds our cage?" The older woman's smile faltered for just a moment. "We do, dear. We build it one blueprint at a time, one practical decision after another. We call it love, but Schopenhauer knew better. It's the will ensuring the species continues, even at the cost of individual freedom." Elena looked down at her own hands, now translucent with exhaustion, and saw David sleeping peacefully in the palm of one while she held a tiny cage in the other. The philosophers called it benevolent tyranny. Today, psychology names it codependency, the unconscious pattern where we enable others' limitations while calling it care. Originated from addiction psychology in the 1980s, codependency manifests in the partner who pays all the bills while their spouse finds themselves, the mother who completes her adult child's job applications, the friend who always has emergency money for others' poor decisions. We become architects of comfortable prisons, building beautiful limitations and calling them love. Schopenhauer would recognize this as the will's most cunning deception. Rather than pursuing our own desires directly, we fulfill them vicariously through others, but only after ensuring they're weak enough to need us, small enough to stay. The will convinces us that we're nurturing when we're actually cultivating dependence, that we're loving when we're actually ensuring will never be abandoned. We mother them into helplessness and call it devotion. In folklore, it was the witch's gingerbread house. In you, it's every time you solve a problem they could solve themselves. Codependency. The construction site fades, leaving Elena alone at her kitchen table. But now she sees her blueprints differently, not as plans for rooms, but as maps of the maze she's built around both their lives. The budget in front of her isn't just numbers, it's a carefully constructed web that makes leaving financially impossible, dreaming practically foolish. She notices David's manuscript on the counter, covered in her helpful red corrections that have somehow turned his wild adventure story into a sensible tale about a man who stays home. What blueprints are you drawing in the margins of someone else's life? What comfortable prison are you building? And which of you is really the architect? The cage only feels like love when both birds have forgotten they once had wings. A man sits alone in a crowded coffee shop, his phone buzzing with notifications he doesn't check. Instead, he traces patterns on the table where her hand used to rest, feeling warmth that isn't there. Thomas collected moments like other people collected stamps. The way Claire laughed at his jokes during their third date, the morning she fell asleep on his shoulder watching Netflix, the text where she said she missed him. Each memory carefully preserved, cataloged, revisited during the long nights when his apartment felt too quiet and his reflection looked too much like his father's, disappointed and alone. But tonight, something strange happened to his collection. As Thomas sat reviewing these precious memories, they began to shift and multiply. His coffee cup transformed into a snow globe, and inside its glass dome, miniature versions of Claire moved through scenes he recognized. There she was, laughing at dinner, there touching his arm while they walked, there saying "I love you" for the first time. He shook the globe gently, watching the tiny figures dance in slow motion through their greatest hits. But as he watched more closely, Thomas noticed something unsettling. In each scene, the miniature Claire looked slightly different. Her smile was brighter, her touch more lingering, her words more passionate than he remembered them being in real life. The coffee shop around him expanded into a vast museum of similar snow globes, each one containing a different man's version of the same woman. Thousands of Claires performed thousands of slightly different versions of the same tender moments. Some Claires were more adventurous, some more nurturing, some more intellectually curious, each one perfectly calibrated to fill the specific emptiness of her collector. An elderly curator approached, his white coat pristine, his expression both kind and clinical. "Magnificent collection, isn't it?" He gestured toward the endless displays. Each globe contains a perfectly preserved version of love, enhanced and refined by memory and longing, much more satisfying than the messy original. Thomas held his globe closer. "But this is how she really was." The curator smiled sadly. "Oh, my boy, that's the beautiful tragedy. You see, the will creates phantom lovers more compelling than flesh and blood ever could be. The real Claire, the one who forgot to text back, who sometimes seemed distant during conversations, who left because she felt more like an idea than a person to you. She was never quite this perfect, was she?" Thomas watched his snow globe Claire mouth "I miss you" over and over, each repetition more tender than the last. Around him, other men sat mesmerized by their own collections, some weeping at the beauty of loves that had never quite existed as they remembered them. He noticed a cracked mirror leaning against one of the display cases, the same one from Elena's construction site, somehow following him here. The romantics called it eternal love. Today, psychology names it limerence, the involuntary, intrusive, and compulsive romantic attachment to another person. Coined by psychologist Dorothy Tennov in 1979, limerence manifests in the person who replays text conversations looking for hidden meanings, who creates elaborate fantasies about someone they barely know, who experiences physical withdrawal symptoms when separated from their love object. We become addicted not to the person, but to our idealized version of them. Schopenhauer understood this phantom creation intimately. He would call it the will's cruelest joke. It makes us fall in love, not with who someone is, but with who we need them to be to fill our existential void. The more unavailable they become, the more perfect our mental version grows. We don't mourn the person who left. We mourn the person we invented, the one who existed primarily in our imagination and fulfilled needs they never actually met. In mythology, it was Pygmalion's Galatea. In you, it's every relationship that felt more real in your head than it ever did in person. Limerence. The museum dissolves, leaving Thomas back in the coffee shop. But now he sees the other patrons differently, each one lost in their own snow globe, their own carefully curated collection of moments that never quite happened the way they remember. His phone buzzes again with a message from someone new, someone real, someone who might disappoint him by being human. He looks at the empty chair across from him and wonders, had Claire ever really sat there, or had he simply needed her to so badly that he'd painted her presence onto his loneliness? Which phantom lover are you feeding with your attention? What perfect version of someone are you choosing over the possibility of loving someone real, flawed, and present? The heart collects moments like a museum collects artifacts, beautiful, preserved, and utterly dead. A therapist closes her office door and removes her professional smile like a heavy coat. In the mirror behind her desk, she practices expressions she's never allowed herself to wear: anger, disappointment, desperate need. Dr. Sarah Chin had spent 15 years helping others navigate their emotional landscapes while keeping her own terra incognita carefully unmapped. Her clients praised her insight, her ability to see patterns they couldn't, her gentle way of illuminating their blind spots. What they didn't know was that she could read their territory so clearly because she'd spent a lifetime perfecting the art of never looking at her own. Tonight, as she prepared to lock up her office, Sarah noticed something peculiar. The city map on her wall, the one she used to help clients visualize their support networks, began to shift and expand. Streets rearranged themselves into neural pathways. Buildings became buried memories. The entire metropolis transformed into a living map of the human psyche, and Sarah found herself walking its twisted avenues. Each district bore a name she recognized from her case notes: Unprocessed Grief Boulevard, Projection Plaza, the Codependency District, where she'd sent Elena with her blueprints. But as Sarah wandered deeper into this psychological geography, she discovered a vast, unmarked territory at the map's center. No roads led there. No street signs identified it. It existed in the space between all the areas she'd helped others explore. A figure emerged from the shadows, another therapist, but one whose coat was torn and whose smile had long since cracked. Fragments of Marcus's discarded mask clung to her shoes like autumn leaves. "Welcome to the territory we don't discuss in graduate school," she said, "the place where the healers hide their wounds." Sarah looked around at the unmarked landscape. It was beautiful and terrible, full of emotions so large they had no names, needs so fundamental they felt shameful to acknowledge. "Why can't I map this place?" The other woman laughed, a sound both bitter and knowing. Because, dear colleague, we've made ourselves indispensable by remaining incomprehensible. We become expert archaeologists of others' ruins while building monuments to our own mysteries. We heal everyone except the person who needs it most. Sarah saw now that the territory wasn't unmarked by accident. It was deliberately obscured. Every time a client's story resonated too closely with her own experience, she'd built another wall around this inner landscape. Every insight she offered others was borrowed from truths she couldn't bear to face herself. She'd become a cartographer who mapped every territory except home. In the distance, she spotted Thomas, sitting alone with his snow globe, lost in his phantom collection, while she remained equally lost in her professional performance of having answers. The wise called it the wounded healer. Today, psychology names it the helper syndrome, the unconscious pattern where individuals compulsively focus on others' problems to avoid confronting their own emotional needs. Identified in psychoanalytic literature, it manifests in the friend who always listens but never shares, the professional who works endless hours helping while neglecting their own well-being, the parent who manages everyone's emotions except their own. We become addicted to being needed because it feels safer than admitting we have needs. Schopenhauer would see this as the will's most sophisticated defense mechanism. Rather than face the terrifying possibility of our own vulnerability, we project it onto others and then save it from a safe distance. We become emotional voyeurs, living vicariously through others' healing while remaining carefully protected from our own transformation. The will convinces us that we're altruistic when we're actually terrified of what we might discover if we turned our professional insight inward. In ancient myths, it was the oracle who could see every future except her own. In you, it's every moment you give advice you desperately need to follow. Helper syndrome. The psychological cityscape fades, leaving Sarah alone in her office. But now she sees the room differently, not as a sanctuary where she helps others heal, but as a bunker where she hides from her own uncharted territories. The diplomas on her wall aren't just credentials, they're permission slips to avoid looking at the one mind she's never dared to analyze. She notices her reflection in the dark window, and for the first time, she doesn't adjust her expression into professional calm. Instead, she lets her face show what it's been hiding. Exhaustion, confusion, and the terrible loneliness of being the person everyone comes to, but no one really knows. What unmarked territory lies at the center of your own map? What healing are you prescribing for others while avoiding the medicine you need most? The healer's wound festers in the space between knowing what helps and allowing yourself to be helped. A child builds a fortress from couch cushions while thunder rolls outside. But as each lightning flash illuminates the room, the fortress walls reveal themselves to be made of newspaper clippings, headlines of disasters that haven't happened yet. Maya had always been the one to see the storm before the clouds gathered. At 8, she'd hidden emergency snacks in her bedroom for famines that never came. At 16, she'd chosen her college major based on recession-proof career prospects rather than passion. At 28, she'd built a life so carefully defended against catastrophe that catastrophe had become unnecessary. She'd imprisoned herself more effectively than any disaster ever could. Tonight, as actual thunder shook her carefully organized apartment, Maya found herself compulsively checking locks, testing smoke detectors, reviewing insurance policies. But as she moved through her rituals of protection, the walls began to breathe with her anxiety. Her apartment stretched and warped until she stood in a vast textile mill where thousands of women worked enormous looms, weaving tapestries of tomorrow's terrors. Each woman at her loom created intricate patterns of worry. Here, a mother wove car accidents involving her teenage son. There, a wife crafted elaborate scenarios of her husband's affair. Another woman created beautiful, terrible tapestries of economic collapse, natural disasters, social rejection, each thread pulled taut with the tension of what if. The air hummed with the sound of spinning wheels and whispered catastrophes. Maya approached the nearest weaver, recognizing something familiar in her hunched shoulders and darting eyes. The woman's tapestry showed the same apartment Maya lived in, but overtaken by burglars, floods, fires, and loneliness. "Beautiful work," said a voice behind her. Maya turned to find an ancient woman whose tapestry was blank except for a single, perfectly woven eye in its center. The broken mirror from Elena's construction site leaned against her loom, reflecting fragments of all the disasters being woven around them. "You're one of our most gifted apprentices. Such detail in your catastrophe work, such commitment to suffering that hasn't happened yet." Maya stared at her own loom, where she'd apparently been weaving for years without realizing it. Her tapestry showed every possible way her life could fall apart, rendered in exquisite, paralyzing detail. "But I'm protecting myself. I'm being prepared." The ancient woman smiled with terrible gentleness. "Oh, child, you're not protecting yourself from suffering. You're manufacturing it. You've become so skilled at imagining pain that you've forgotten to notice when it's not actually happening. The will has convinced you that constant vigilance equals survival. But all you've really survived is the present moment." Maya looked around at the mill and understood. These women weren't preparing for disasters. They were creating them in their minds with such vividness that their bodies responded as if the threats were real. They'd become addicted to the adrenaline of imaginary danger, trapped in a cycle where the only relief from anxiety was more planning for catastrophes that would never arrive as expected. She noticed Marcus's confident mask lying near her loom's base, reminder that even preparation could become a performance designed to manage others' expectations of female worry. The ancient Greeks called it prophecy. Today, psychology names it anticipatory anxiety, the mind's tendency to experience future threats as if they were present realities. Rooted in our evolutionary survival mechanisms, it manifests in the person who can't sleep because they're mentally rehearsing tomorrow's difficult conversation, the parent who experiences physical panic symptoms while imagining their child's potential dangers, the professional who burns out not from actual problems, but from preparing for hypothetical ones. We become time travelers, but only to visit disasters. Schopenhauer understood this temporal imprisonment. He would call it the will's cruelest temporal trick. It traps us not just in wanting what we don't have, but in fearing what we might lose or encounter. The will convinces us that suffering in advance somehow lessens future pain, but instead it simply extends pain across time. We experience every potential disaster twice, once in imagination and once in reality, if it comes at all. Most of our suffering exists only in the space between what is and what might be. In folklore, it was Cassandra's curse to see tragedies she couldn't prevent. In you, it's every moment spent suffering over events that exist only in tomorrow's shadows, anticipatory anxiety. The textile mill dissolves, leaving Maya standing in her apartment as the real storm passes outside. The thunder has stopped, but she realizes she's been living in internal storms for years, weathering catastrophes that existed only in her imagination. Her carefully organized emergency supplies look different now, not like practical preparation, but like offerings to the gods of worry, tributes paid to keep imaginary disasters appeased. She walks to her window and sees the city lights twinkling in the aftermath of actual rain. For the first time in years, she notices that the storm she was preparing for has already passed, and she's still here, still safe, still so focused on tomorrow's potential pain that she's forgotten to notice today's quiet peace. What disasters are you weaving on the loom of tomorrow? How much of your life are you spending in preparation for sorrows that exist only in the space between now and never? The future's greatest tragedy is not what might happen to you, but what you do to yourself while waiting for it to arrive.